thought we'd get in someone who knows about the importance of spuds. He is another man, but we'll promise we'll do better tomorrow. Chris Claridge, the Chief Executive of Potatoes NZ, joins us now. Chris, kia ora, welcome to the panel.
You're well. It's good to hear from you again.
Tell us about the tsunami of frozen fries, Chris. Potatoes NZ predicted this was on the horizon back in May. So this was an issue earlier on, but it's come to pass, has it?
Yeah, we had identified early on in the year that because of supply chain interruptions in Europe and because of the timing of their planting and harvests, that there was a mountain of potatoes, and as well there was a massive build-up of frozen fries in their system. And what we saw was a decrease in their exports. Normally they export about 400,000 tonnes a month. To give you some context, we produce annually 150,000 tonnes. So they had their and because of COVID-19 and lockdowns, they had a massive build-up in inventory, and as well their exports halved to around about 200,000 tonnes a month. But because New Zealand and Australia and Southeast Asia have done relatively well in regards to COVID-19, our economies were still intact and still functioning, notwithstanding the earlier comments. I'm sorry, what was the other panellist's name?
Heather Roy and David Cormack.
Yeah, and I heard David talk about the domestic tourism. At least we have tourism, and that consumes a lot of fries because people, when they travel and entertain themselves, like having some fries. So we saw and had identified a potential risk, and we knew that there was a potential for a flood of imports, and because there's a delay in getting hold of data, we have now got that data that shows there's been a significant increase in exports to New Zealand, and now we're seeing on the shelves in the stores discounted frozen fries from Holland and Belgium. So
there's now
asked the government to intervene.
Okay, so there's a hashtag now, I gather, hashtag Save Our Fries.
Correct, yeah, because fries are an important food group. They're very, very important.
Are they?
Potatoes
Are they?
Very close to everyone's hearts. Absolutely. You can go for a week without politics. Try going for a week without potatoes.
David?
Yeah, I mean, my daughter loves fries, which is not great at her age. And so...
How old is she?
Just under 2. And so...
Food group for her.
Yeah, it's, so there's drawbacks and pros to potatoes. I'm a pro-potato kind of person myself. I think we need to look after our domestic potato industry. I'm not going to lie and say I have a lot of knowledge about our domestic potato industry. But look, there should be a Buy Kiwi Made campaign for potatoes.
Heather?
Absolutely.
Well, I'd eat New Zealand fries as opposed to somebody else's, but I am a recent convert to kumara chips, which I think is severely underrated.
We offer a counselling service.
I was about to say that is an outrageously terrible call.
Yeah, and there's a deprogramming course that we can put people through.
Deprogram, I might have to take advantage of that.
Hey, well, all the best with the hashtag Save Our Fries, Chris. And as you say, they are a part of a food group that we need to remind ourselves of. Might have some chips tonight, actually. Chris Claridge, thank you. And what a wonderful panellists you were. Heather Roy, David Cormack, thank you, and all our men too. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, 3:45. See you then.
Whakaronga mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, the billboards are up, but it's Todd Muller out. The surprise resignation of the National Party leader just 53 days into the gig and weeks from the election. We'll go live to Wellington as MPs gather for a crisis meeting and a new round of voting. We also hit the streets to find out who the people's choice is for National's top job. A charter flight of 30 deportees from Australia arrives in Auckland. The government builds a travel bridge with the Cook Islands. Is isolation-free travel really on the way? And 3 police searches carried out after the Christchurch mosque attacks were illegal. You need a clean-up? Who are you going to call? Germ bots. It's a thing. Don't forget, you can check us out on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. After a tumultuous day for the opposition, the National Caucus is now scrambling to select a new leader. The party was left leaderless this morning after the shock resignation of Todd Muller. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
A shell-shocked caucus is preparing to meet in Wellington in just a few hours to decide who is best to fill the hole left absent by Todd Muller. The Bay of Plenty MP issued a statement this morning saying he cannot carry on in the position, the pressure too much. It's just 53 days after he rolled Simon Bridges, convinced he could do a better job heading into the election. Mr Bridges may now be in the running to return, refusing to rule out that possibility this afternoon. Judith Collins and Mark Mitchell were also coy when quizzed by reporters. From Parliament, Craig McCulloch.
Acting National Leader Nikki Kaye also isn't ruling out putting her hand up to take over from Mr Muller, but she says the most important thing right now is Mr Muller's welfare.
Oh look, we've got a process to go through, and tonight we're having the caucus meeting. Just again, my compassion is with Todd and Michelle and their family at this time.
Nikki Kaye says the country needs a national government. Bay of Plenty locals aren't rating National's chances in this year's election after Mr Muller's decision. Jan, who lives in Katikati, respects his reasons for standing down.
I think it's quite a shame, really. I think it's very brave of him, and I think it's a good thing. He knows what he was doing. He's put himself and his health first. It's tricky for the National Party.
Jan says she and a few of her friends are thinking about voting for ACT in September. Firearms owners are welcoming a decision by the Independent Police Conduct Authority over unlawful searches carried out after the Christchurch mosque attacks. During the searches, the police used powers under the Surveillance Act to enter homes without a warrant and seize firearms. The authority says the searches generated a number of complaints, and of those it investigated, 3 were found to be unlawful. The Council of Licensed Firearms Owners Chair, Michael Dowling, says the police made major mistakes.
They are the enforcement power of our laws, and so they need to act within the law whenever they act. And I guess in these events it shows that perhaps the checks and safeties are not there to make sure that they, as enforcers of the law, are not wound up in the emotion of an event.
Michael Dowling. A fisherman has been described as greedy for failing to disclose an 11-tonne haul of shellfish. Kevin Clark's unreported catch included tonnes of paua and crayfish. The Ministry for Primary Industries estimates the Chatham Islands fisher made $340,000 from the catch. He was given 9 months in home detention and 200 hours of community service. MPI's Director of Compliance, Gary Orr, says the theft is unprecedented and threatens the fisheries sustainability. The court also ordered the forfeiture of Clark's boats, holding pots and quota shares. A police officer says there was never any time to coordinate a proper plan to deal with an erratic man in Waitara. In April 2000, Stephen Wallace was shot dead by Senior Constable Keith Abbott, who was later acquitted of murder after a private prosecution. Mr Wallace's family believes he was deprived of the right to life and are taking a civil case against the police. At the High Court in Wellington, Joseph Dombrowski, now a detective sergeant, said Stephen Wallace was volatile and posed a safety risk.
It is good practice to plan your options if you have time. However, this was an emergency situation and many of the options were off the table due to Mr Wallace's behaviour.
Jason Dombrowski, who was one of the first on the scene. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 5. National Rugby League clubs based outside of Queensland must revert to the NRL's original strict biosecurity protocols and stop mixing with the general public. Players and staff within team bubbles, including the Warriors, who are based in New South Wales, can't go to cafes, restaurants, pubs, beaches and golf courses from tomorrow. The Australian Rugby League Commission Chairman, Peter V'landys, says today's decision was made due to the spike in COVID-19 cases in Sydney. V'landys says an option to relocate all NRL teams to Queensland is on the table, but he's confident it won't be necessary. The former All Blacks midfielder Richard Kahui is making a return to Super Rugby, signing with the Western Force to play in the Australian edition of the revamped competition. The 35-year-old Rugby World Cup winner has spent the past 7 years playing in Japan for top league side Toshiba. Kahui has already completed his 2-week quarantine period and is now training with the Western Force squad. There are more injury woes for the Southern Steel netball side, with shooter Jennifer O'Connell having a scan this week to assess a knee injury suffered during the side's recent narrow loss to the defending ANZ Premiership champions, the Pulse. Head coach Reinga Bloxham says it's a cruel blow, having already lost fellow shooter Georgia Heffernan to a season-ending knee injury. Bloxham says it will be a big task to rebuild their shooting combination once again. That's the news.
A shock resignation. Todd Muller stands down at 7:30 in the morning.
It shows how completely unprepared he was for the role. He obviously thought that, he was God's gift to the National Party in taking over from Simon Bridges.
Even if the government bungles, they have to be able to present themselves as a coherent and credible alternative to the government. That's looking a little bit shaky right now.
Being a leader of a political party on the national stage is an extremely competitive and bruising role.
Breaking news. Morning report. Weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, cloudy periods today, rain developing tomorrow morning and becoming heavy from the afternoon with possible downpours and easterly gales. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, patchy drizzle, turning to rain tomorrow with heavy falls about Coromandel from the evening. Strong or gale easterlies tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mostly cloudy with occasional rain or drizzle. Whanganui, Manawatu, Horowhenua and Kapiti, mainly fine weather. Wellington, Wairarapa and Marlborough, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow morning and a few showers developing. To Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, fine weather. Canterbury and Otago, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow. A few showers or drizzle developing, especially near the coast. Southland, a few light showers, clearing tomorrow. Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The National Party is in crisis mode, with its MPs tonight scrambling to select a new leader, just 10 weeks out from the general election. Todd Muller stunned his colleagues this morning with news of his resignation, effective immediately, citing the toll of the job as too much to bear. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The mad scramble to return to Wellington. National MPs converging on the capital for an emergency meeting. A shell-shocked party left leaderless.
Yeah, I think we were all taken by surprise.
It's been a shock. There's no two ways about it.
I had no inkling that he'd been thinking about it.
Came out of the blue.
It was not even 2 months ago the caucus was in a similar spot, flying in from around the country for crisis talks, ultimately rolling Simon Bridges and putting Todd Muller in his place. A high-stakes gamble which has gone spectacularly awry. Today, Todd Muller is gone. His seat barely warm, the shortest stint for any national leader in modern history. National MPs learnt the news early this morning, blindsided in a caucus teleconference. Mr Muller was not on the line. Moments later, out went his public statement. The role has taken a heavy toll, it said. It has become untenable from a health perspective. In short, the Bay of Plenty MP has had a breakdown.
It's been a pretty tough week last week, and I think that was obviously a contributing factor.
It's unfortunate. I'm very sad for him.
It wasn't easy on Simon. It hasn't been easy on Todd.
Mr Muller is a very fine New Zealander, man I've got a great deal of respect for.
My thoughts at the moment are for Todd Muller and his family, so anything else can wait.
Mr Muller was propelled from the backbenches to the top job in May, with the party wallowing in the polls. He challenged Mr Bridges and won by a whisker, suddenly finding himself in charge of a bitterly divided caucus.
I'm not interested in opposition for opposition's sake.
But his 53 days at the helm were defined by distractions and disaster. There was the controversial Make America Great Again hat.
Yeah, I love American politics.
Then the frontbench fiasco, Mr Muller filling his top team with only white faces. His deputy Nikki Kay then defending it with this almighty clangor.
Paul Goldsmith obviously is of Ngāti Porou.
Paul, right, yeah.
No, I'm not Mario.
But last week was the worst yet, with news 2 national MPs had been handed private COVID patient data and one had then passed it on to the media. It culminated in this, an excruciating stand-up on Thursday in which Mr Muller repeatedly evaded questions and made comments which were later revealed to be false.
Was Michelle bogus source for Michael Woodhouse? Have you spoken to him? No, look again, I don't really understand where you're going with this.
But it would be Mr Muller who'd be going. That performance, the final straw. The MP withdrew to his electorate and stopped responding to messages. In today's statement, he says he took the weekend to reflect and then made his decision. The National Caucus now faces a decision of its own, less than 10 weeks from the election, who to put in charge. And guess who's back and raring to go?
You know, a lot of people say, but I know being leader of the opposition's the toughest job in politics.
Simon Bridges has done the job before and he knows it well, but he was rolled for a reason. The public simply did not like him.
When the going gets tough get going, and we've got some difficult discussions and choices to make over the next little while. Let's see what happens.
Other names in the mix include Deputy Nikki Kay and outsider Mark Mitchell. Neither have ruled out making a tilt. But other MPs who've spoken to RNZ say they see the only real option is Judith Collins. She's long had eyes on the leadership and has name recognition with the public. Popular with the base, but polarising with the public and within caucus.
Well, obviously we'll be leaving all that matter up to our discussions.
So you're not ruling that out when you head in the ring?
I'm just going to have the discussions in caucus.
Those discussions are due to get underway in just a few hours. A bruising day for the opposition, a crushing end to Mr Muller's political ambitions. But politics waits for no one. And the caucus now faces that massive decision. Who will be the next leader of the opposition? The fourth since last election. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Our political reporter Joe Moyer is at the airport in Wellington as national MPs funnel into the capital for the caucus meeting tonight. Kia ora, Joe. Is anyone missing? Any late stragglers coming through?
Yeah, hi Lisa. Yep, there is one straggler. We understand that Paula Bennett, obviously the former deputy leader who was ousted by Nikki Kay and Todd Muller when they took over from Simon Bridges and Paula Bennett, she is due to come in right this minute. Her plane is meant to be landing right now, so we're expecting her to come through. One of the last ones in. The only other person we haven't seen come through is Amy Adams, although it's highly possible she actually came through last night. But we've had a real stream of them come through the airport today.
So who have you managed to speak to and what have they been saying?
Well, I guess the ones that have been the most important ones that have come through are the ones who aren't ruling themselves out as running for the leadership. So that's Judith Collins, Simon Bridges, Nikki Kay, Mark Mitchell and Shane Nuriti. So they have all come through and refused to say whether they will or won't run in that vote tonight that we're expecting to take place. Judith Collins told us that she was surprised by Todd Muller's resignation. Nikki Kay said that she was most concerned about Todd Muller's welfare, and it was important that they, be worried about him and make sure he's okay and just get on with the process tonight. The whole caucus seems to be quite shocked by what has taken place. Sarah Dowie came through the airport not long ago. Now she is finishing up at the election this year, and she was a strong supporter of Simon Bridges when Todd Muller rolled him. She said that there should never have been a coup. She said it was a mistake in the first place that Simon Bridges got turfed out. And Paul Goldsmith came through and he also said that he was disappointed that Todd Muller had resigned, but they just needed to get on with it. Most recently, we've just had Melissa Lee come off a flight from Auckland. She said she was extremely shocked by the resignation. She said she doesn't know who's running. A lot of the sort of more backbench MPs said that they hadn't had any phone calls, well, at least they told us they hadn't had any phone calls and they didn't know who would be running in that vote. Melissa Lee also made the comment in response to a question about the diversity of the leadership, which obviously diversity on the front bench has been a topic before. She said that she thinks there's enough ethnic diversity in the party, so that wouldn't be playing a part for her in terms of who she voted for the leadership.
It's going to be an interesting evening. Thanks for joining us. That is Joe Moyer, our political reporter, who has been and is at Wellington Airport as those National Party MPs stream through to their crisis meeting. Well, one person who was nowhere to be seen in Wellington today was Todd Muller himself. The now former opposition leader is asking the public to respect his family's privacy following his brutal fall from grace. But while Mr Muller wasn't talking, his stunned constituents are. Our reporter Sarah Robson and visual journalist Simon Rogers headed to the Bay of Plenty to take the pulse of voters there.
In his first public outing as the newly minted National Party leader at the end of May, Todd Muller headed home to the Bay of Plenty. Getting back to his roots in Katikati, he visited the Apata Kiwi Fruit Packhouse, a company co-founded by his father and that Mr Miller himself had been the chief executive of until 2010. In Katikati today, locals had mixed reactions to his decision to quit as the leader of the opposition.
Yeah, quite shocked actually. Yeah, absolutely. But I guess too much stress, too much realising what he's got to take on. So not quite sure where that leaves Simon Bridges, but...
Well, I think it actually took a lot of courage for him to actually realise that he wasn't up to the job, and he's better to stand down earlier than later.
I think he probably shouldn't have got the job in the first place then if he didn't think he could do it.
I think it's quite a shame, really. I think it's very brave of him, and I think it's a good thing. He knows what he was doing. He's put himself and his health first. It's tricky for the National Party.
But it doesn't spell the end of his career in politics. Todd Muller will again stand in the Bay of Plenty electorate, a seat he's held since he first entered Parliament in 2014. It's a safe national seat. In the last two elections, Mr Muller has won it with a 60% share of the vote. But if Mr Muller isn't leading the National Party into September's election, who do locals in Katikati think will?
Simon Bridges may just be a surprise one.
Do you reckon Simon could make a comeback?
I think he could.
Bay of Plenty local too?
Yes.
Well, it could be Judith. I'm a big fan of Mark Mitchell. I lived in that area for a while and I think he's a wonderful man. I don't know if he's tough enough. He's just so lovely. But Judith, I think she could stand up and offer Jacinda some good opposition.
Had a little discussion at home this morning, but yeah, not really sure who would want to do it.
But how do people in Katikati rate National's chances come polling day on September the 19th?
I think Jacinda will be happy, put it that way.
It's a whole new ball game now, absolutely. So good luck to whoever does it.
I think it's terrible for National. But I believe Labour will get in. Either way, doesn't matter who's in Parliament. Who's running for National, Labour will have a second government.
Would National want to come in and clean up the mess that Jacinda's leaving with the economy? I'm not sure. Let Jacinda clean up her own backyard, actually. I think it's a chance for ACT to come in, get up there. Myself and quite a few of my friends, we're thinking the ACT way. Yes, first time. It would be a first time for me.
The National Party caucus will hold an emergency meeting in Wellington tonight to decide just who will take on the toughest job in politics, leader of the opposition, just weeks out from the election. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
It is 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback on this. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Who do you think the next leader of the National Party should be and why? And were you surprised by the resignation this morning? We would love to hear from you. 30 deportees from Australia are settling into their first night of their 2-week stay at a central Auckland hotel. A charter flight landed at Auckland Airport this morning as the deportation of New Zealanders from across the Tasman resumes after a hiatus due to COVID-19. Health Minister Chris Hipkins says the process wasn't too different to other returning New Zealanders.
They were processed as all incoming flights are processed. They've been taken to a hotel where there is an extra security, as I mentioned yesterday, because it's important that the public have that extra reassurance. Given the profile of the cohort of people who have been arriving this morning, I understand that they've all now arrived at that hotel. They've all been checked in. Everybody's following the rules, and there haven't been any issues with that.
Before detailing what extra security measures are in place at the inner city hotel.
It's a combination of the venue, so making sure that the venue is very secure. The selection of the venue, I think, was undertaken on that basis, that it was a venue that was that could be secured well. And then, of course, there are additional security, additional police and Defence Force personnel there, just to make sure, give us all reassurance that nothing's going to go wrong there.
He added that there won't be staff policing the floors of the hotel.
They don't have door-to-door supervision. We haven't done that for anybody who's in managed isolation or quarantine. We are confident, though, that all of the relevant security measures at that hotel are put in place so that they're not going to be coming out into the community. And as I said, the feedback that I've had so far this morning is that this group are very cooperative. They're all following the rules, they're all checked in, and they're all doing what they should be doing.
Mr Hipkins also announced one new case of COVID-19 in managed isolation today, and that the government will be ramping up testing to ensure there's no community transmission of the virus. A holiday in the Pacific appears to be a step closer tonight, with confirmation New Zealand officials are working on a travel bridge with the realm countries, Cook Islands, Niue and Tokelau. The concept would allow citizens to travel between the countries freely without managed isolation or quarantine.
We're hopeful that in the next week a decision will be made, but we've had a look at this, and there is no real reason why we cannot do this in terms of ensuring we protect the health and safety of people in both countries, whilst at the same time trying to get back into business, particularly with tourism travel, but also from a humanitarian perspective. We have a number of medical referrals that require things like elective surgery, treatment, testing and diagnosis for cancer in New Zealand. But I'm confident the officials will be able to agree on the protocols to allow this to happen. And, we'll be looking forward to some sort of announcement by next week.
How would you see this playing out? I mean, would there be an immediate pickup by airlines resuming flights? Would it be uncapped? The borders operating completely as before?
Well, it's only restricted to New Zealand passport holders. We believe in a step-by-step process, only for Kiwis and those that have been in New Zealand for 30 days at least. We have had tremendous interest from the airlines to be able to commence flying. Everybody's looking to get back into business in some form, but also some great responses from the likes of Air New Zealand, from Auckland Airport, in terms of putting in place measures to try and mitigate against any sort of threat of infection. So dedicated arrival gates, complete separation from any other passengers arriving from other countries. These are the measures that these organisations are willing to put in place for travellers between our two countries to make sure that we minimise any sort of risk.
And that is Mark Brown, the Deputy Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, talking to Mackenzie Smith there. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says she's asked officials to work on timelines, but no dates have been set. And the Health Minister, Chris Hipkins, at today's COVID-19 briefing in Auckland, said a cabinet decision still needs to happen and urged caution before opening the region.
The New Zealand government is speaking to the realm countries about when travel between our countries might resume. Obviously, the realm countries are a priority for us, and our Prime Minister's been clear that we haven't set a particular time frame around that yet. Of course, we want to do that when we can and when we can do that safely. The New Zealand Prime Minister has been very clear that we do want to work with the realm countries, and we want to resume travel between New Zealand and the realm countries when we can and do so safely. But nobody in New Zealand wants to be responsible for any increase in risk in the Cook Islands or in the Pacific. New Zealand and Australia in the past have been transmitters of infection into the Pacific, and we don't want to do that again in the future.
Chris Hipkins speaking in Auckland today after visiting the Jet Park Quarantine Hotel. The Police Conduct Authority has found 3 police searches carried out shortly after the Christchurch mosque attacks were unlawful. The searches, made without a warrant, happened during an operation to identify people of interest to national security following the attacks. The police used powers under the Surveillance Act to enter homes and, in most cases, seize firearms and firearms licences. And as Anand Zaki reports, firearms owners feel vindicated by the findings.
The 3 unlawful searches in question were all in Canterbury, weeks after the massacre at the 2 mosques in Christchurch. One person, only known as Mr. X, became a person of interest after an anonymous call to Crime Stoppers, alleging that he was involved in white supremacy, anti-Muslim hate speech and racist behaviour. The second person, known as Mr. Y, came to attention after the police received information that he had been posting far-right material on Facebook. Both had firearms seized from their properties. The police visited the third person, known as Mr. Z, after Facebook posts caused concern about his mental well-being, and officers seized a bong from his property. The Independent Police Conduct Authority Chair Judge Colin Doughty says the officers should have had a warrant in the 3 cases.
Police are required to obtain a warrant to make a search where there's time to do so, but they may exercise powers under the Search and Surveillance Act without a warrant in situations of urgency. We found that in these cases, the 3 cases here, there wasn't sufficient urgency and they could have got a warrant.
The Independent Police Conduct Authority received 13 complaints about the searches. Judge Doughty also says there hadn't been enough focus given to the searches over what powers the police could or could not exercise. He says the authority hasn't made any recommendations.
Search and surveillance and the exercise of warrants is bread and butter to police, so every police officer ought to know what they should do. We noted that in these cases apologies had been given to the subjects of the searches.
The Council of Licensed Firearms Owners say its members feel vindicated by the IPCA decision. Its chair, Michael Dowling, says the police made major mistakes.
They are the enforcement power of our laws, and so they need to act within the law whenever they act. And I guess in these events it shows that perhaps the checks and safeties are not there to make sure that they, as enforcers of the law, are not wound up in the emotion of an event.
Canterbury Police District Commander John Price fronted today, admitting mistakes were made. But he says it is important to know the context around the time the searches were carried out, as after the terror attacks, the country had never been in an environment like it before.
At the time, they were in a very heightened operational context. They were trying to eliminate or mitigate the risk of further violence and ensure public safety. That was their intent and that was their principles that they were applying.
Superintendent Price says the police will learn from the findings.
Oh, look, we've always got to be open to lessons learnt, and laws and are there to protect all people. And as such, you're absolutely always open to ensuring there are good checks and balances.
The police say they'll be looking to work with the IPCA to find any solutions following the ruling. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Anand Zaki.
A police officer says he and his colleagues had to think on their feet before one of them fatally shot a man in Taranaki 20 years ago. In April 2000, Senior Constable Keith Abbott shot Stephen Wallace and was later acquitted of murder following a private prosecution by Wallace's family. Now the family has taken a civil case to the High Court in Wellington, alleging police deprived Stephen Wallace of the right to life. Jonathan Mitchell is covering the case.
Stephen Wallace had walked down Waitara's main street using a club to smash shop windows, a taxi and then a patrol car with officers inside. Jason Dombrowski, who's now a detective sergeant, was one of the first at the scene and told the court Mr Wallace was in a volatile state and officers were thinking fast on their feet.
Mr Wallace started walking towards Constable Abbott, who was to my left on the other side of the police car, and started yelling, "Arsehole, I'm going to kill you." Constable Abbott was continuously talking to Mr Wallace. I heard him say, David, what are you doing? It's me, Constable Abbott. What are you doing? Put down the bar.
Mr Abbott had thought the man approaching him was another Waitara man, David Tower. Mr Dombrowski went on to describe the shooting in detail.
Constable Abbott fired a warning shot straight up into the air. Mr Wallace did not acknowledge the warning shot. He continued yelling and threatening Constable Abbott and said again, "I'm going to kill you." He then increased his speed towards Constable Abbott. He did not run, but his walk was more determined, and he had the baseball bat raised up in the air ready to strike. I believed at the time that had Mr Wallace reached Constable Abbott, he would have used the baseball bat to strike him. He continued advancing towards Constable Abbott, and when he was about 3 metres from him, I saw Constable Abbott shoot Mr Wallace. All up was about a minute or a minute and a half between when we got out of the car and when he was shot. I did not fire any shots. Mr Wallace seemed to hesitate and then his arm went to his side and he dropped the baseball bat and it rolled away from him. And he then fell to the ground. Constable Abbott remained where he was to mark his position.
Jason Dombrowski told the court there was no time to construct a proper plan.
It is good practice to plan your options if you have time. However, this was an emergency situation and many of the options were off the table due to Mr Wallace's behaviour.
Earlier in court today, a former senior police officer turned private investigator slammed the actions of officers during the fatal shooting. Peter Hikaka said the officers created the confrontation by going back to the station to arm themselves.
They didn't demonstrate that they believed it urgent, but then they draw firearms. So that's sort of contrary, really, because they go to the most extreme methods of dealing with Mr Wallace.
He said the officers could have cordoned and contained the situation. He disagreed with many findings in subsequent reports and labelled the police actions as extreme. The case continues. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell, Aho.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, more on Todd Muller's bow out from the national leadership. Former National MP Jonathan Coleman and former United Future leader Peter Dunn join me to discuss what's next for the party. And small businesses welcome another $40 million to help their recovery after lockdown. And the cleaning machines keeping public spaces spick and span during the pandemic. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program this evening. We'd love to hear what you make of Todd Muller's resignation, who you'd like to see take his place. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and the email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go now to the headlines with Susanna.
National MPs are gathering at Parliament for an emergency caucus following the immediate resignation of leader Todd Muller this morning. Acting National leader Nikki Kaye isn't ruling out putting herself forward to take over, but says there is a process to go through and that her compassion is with Mr Muller and his family. Locals in Todd Muller's electorate, Bay of Plenty, are shocked by his decision, which cited the heavy toll it has taken on his family and his health, 2 months after taking over from Simon Bridges. Bev, who lives in Katikati, says it took a lot of courage and she's glad he took the decision sooner rather than later. A Chatham Islands fisherman who made an estimated $340,000 from unreported shellfish has been described as enormously greedy. Kevin Clark failed to report 11 tonnes of catch, which included paua and crayfish, and has been given 9 months in home detention and 200 hours of community service. The Council of Licensed Firearms Owners says the police made major mistakes following the Christchurch mosque attacks. The IPCA has found 3 home searches to seize firearms that took place without a warrant were unlawful. A police officer says there was no time to coordinate a proper plan to deal with an erratic man who was shot by a constable in Waitara 2 decades ago. At the High Court in Wellington, Detective Sergeant Jason Dombrowski says while it's good practice to plan options, many were off the table due to Stephen Wallace's behaviour. A new survey by the Reserve Bank suggests low interest rates won't be enough to offset the economic impacts of COVID-19. It's found demand for residential mortgage loans has dropped significantly since March, and banks have also tightened up on lending. Demand and credit availability for home loans is expected to remain in negative territory for the rest of the year. Victoria has recorded 270 new cases of the coronavirus in the last 24 hours. 28 of the new infections are connected to known outbreaks and 242 remain under investigation. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. And if you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time to go to the business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, what do you want to talk about first today?
Well, we could talk about migration numbers.
Yeah, do.
They're very hard to make sense of, I have to say. So many of the numbers we're seeing now are just really difficult to interpret because they're so wildly out of sync with the trends that we've seen over past years. So, for example, the migration numbers, what we're seeing now is that the lowest number of people going back and forth across the border took place in May, and that was the lowest level since 1959, and that's 61 years. So we haven't seen that kind of crossing in that long. And when you talk about those numbers, what do they mean? It's hard to make sense of them. But we're saying like 16,000 people moved across the border in May, and that compares with 1 million the year earlier, or half as many that crossed in April.
Obviously, all due to border restrictions that
yes, of course,
related to COVID. So, as you say, you really can't take a gauge, can you?
No, and I spoke to an economist to try and get some sense into these numbers, because we've also been covering what effect this is having on our migrant labor market, because we do need seasonal workers to help us with harvests and or just to fill, low-skilled jobs in the hospitality industry and so forth. These are people like backpackers and so on. So while Immigration Minister has extended the visas for some classes of workers, that's just like less than 10% of the numbers who are going to have to leave. And what we're seeing, for example, is on a daily basis, 600 people are leaving the country, 350 are arriving. That's a loss of 250 people a day. This has been carrying on for some time. So it's really interesting when we look at the picture that we see in New Zealand now. So yeah, the numbers almost make no sense if you think that there was an estimated 80,700 people to the year ended in May coming back and forth across. What we actually have was just 400 people arriving, a net 400 arriving during April and May.
I find those numbers really interesting, given the next story that we're going to talk about, which is house prices, right?
That's another one.
So obviously immigration was blamed for fueling house prices, yet still very few people coming and going, as you point out. But house prices and sales are apparently up. Is this the case?
Again, it's so hard to make sense of these numbers. So yeah, it is the case. The seasonally adjusted house price index, it rose. And so what we had was an increase in the index, which measures the movement of house prices overall. It was about 8.6%. But then when you look at the average or the median price rise, it was like an increase of 4% over the month, 10% over the year earlier in June. So a 10% increase in prices, you'd think, wow, how could that be? Now, even the Real Estate Institute is pretty, they're cheerleaders for their industry, obviously. Even they wanted to say, well, but is this sustainable? Certainly economists don't think it will be. So yeah, we're seeing big increases in the value of house sales, but it's hard to imagine why that's the case. Certainly inventory is down at record levels. We haven't seen a level of it. What's down 12% over the year, so for a June month, over at any time, this is the lowest number of houses available for sale in all the times we've been keeping records. Yeah, so there's not very many houses for sale. So I guess it kind of makes sense that the price would go up. But that's not sustainable. I mean, there's no indicators that suggest that everything is going to go ahead at this rate.
Okay, so what has been happening on the market today?
Well, again, we closed up 0.5%. No good reason for that. 59 points up to 11,494. Certainly the international market is a little bit cautious. We are entering the earnings season in the United States, so that's given people a bit of hope that there might be some life there. But at the other side of it, California's closed up for COVID, and we've seen that in Victoria too, so that's not positive news, is it? No. Anyways, the New Zealand dollar is down a bit, 65.4 US cents, 94.1 cents Australian, and 52.1 British pence, and we'll just keep bringing you these crazy numbers every day.
Look forward to it, Nona. Thanks for joining us. That is Nona Peltier with our Business Wrap. Let's head back to our top story now, and that's the surprise resignation of National Party leader Todd Muller after a little over 7 weeks in the job. In announcing his departure, Todd Muller said it had become clear to him that he is not the best person for the job. The MP even shocked his team of 54 by bailing out of the blue. They're now all gathering in Wellington for a crisis meeting and to elect a replacement. Now, joining me now to discuss all of this are former National Government Minister Jonathan Coleman and former United Future Leader and Minister Peter Dunn. Good evening to you both. Peter.
Good evening. Hi, Peter.
Hey, Peter, can I
Jonathan.
come to you first? Who are the contenders? That is the big question. Is there a field of contenders or is there only one?
Well, there's always a field to start with, and it narrows down. I think the names in the mix are Collins, Bridges possibly, Adams possibly, Nikki Kay and Mark Mitchell. And I see Shane Retty's indicating he could be a candidate as well. Now, it will sort itself out to probably one or two, I suspect, by the time the caucus concludes this evening. And as Jonathan knows far better than me, when the National Party does these things, it does them pretty well and pretty cleanly, and within 24 hours, one name will have emerged at the top of the pile.
So, Jonathan, who do you reckon is the front runner here?
Well, look, I don't think anyone knows. I mean, it's just such an unprecedented event, a leader resigning like this. And I'm not absolutely sure you'll have a leader announced at the end of this meeting tonight. I think it's much more of what happens now. I think you'll get one within 24 hours. But look, it really depends on, what are they aiming to do here? And what they've got to do is actually put in the best possible performance in very difficult circumstances in the general election. Don't think too far ahead. Who's best to steady the ship? You need a Kane Williamson type, steady the ship, get things back on our key issues rather than personalities and crises. You need someone who can do that.
So, Jonathan, hang on. If I can just interrupt you there, Jonathan. Are you saying that the goal for this election is to just, put enough runs on the board that you can hold your head high, but any thought of winning is out of the realm?
No, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying they shouldn't be looking at the scoreboard at this moment. They should be looking at how do we get back on track. The election is still, over a couple of months away. If there's one lesson from COVID-19, it's that anything can happen at any time. So they should still be going all out to win. But the point is they've got to actually, get the ship back on course and get people talking about who is the best team to manage the economy in the long term. Get them off these, major distractions and major challenges for the party and back on, look, who's the best team to manage New Zealand in the long term? That's the issue, the challenge that they've got.
Peter,
so they've got to go out to win.
Peter, do you think the next leader is a sacrificial lamb? They're a space holder for the election?
Well, they are in one sense, but they need not be. I think the challenge now is to make sure that the wound is staunched as much as possible. Look, if National gets back with somewhere near the same amount of seats as it's got now, and ACT does as well as the polls are suggesting, then frankly the contest is all on. So the mission for National has got to be, first of all, staunch the wound, stop the bleeding, make sure they can get those seats back. If they do well enough, then whoever's the leader, I think, has got a good claim to say, we've come this far, let's carry on the journey over the next 3 years. But if they fail miserably, who knows? I mean, this is a bit like when the Labour Party threw Geoffrey Palmer to the wolves and put in Mike Moore desperately to save them. In the event, they actually ended up 2 seats worse off than they would have been had they not made the change. And I think that's the scenario the National Party's got to worry about coming to fruition, that they do all of this and they still do poorly compared to what they could have done. Whereas I think making sure, as Jonathan says, they just get the innings back on track. You want 1 or 2 people to play a pretty solid knock for the next few weeks, build a bit of a partnership, so to speak, and then you're in with a chance to go on and make a chase. But you can't do it from this point.
Jonathan, sorry to put the acid on you, but can Simon Bridges really make a comeback?
Well, look, anything's possible, but I mean, it's a difficult narrative, isn't it, that, 7 weeks ago the caucus decided that Simon wasn't the guy who could win the election, and that was the big theme of why Todd was elected to the chair, and now they're going, actually, we got that wrong, we're going back to Simon. I think one of the issues, if they go back to Simon, it's an admission that, they've got so much wrong, and the problems that they had in the first place won't go away. On the other hand, National were polling 46% back in February. COVID is an event that's knocked incumbent governments all around the world. But, look, I think it's such a difficult narrative. I think what would happen would be the voters would go, oh, look, clearly these guys are too disorganised. They had one leader, they chopped him. The next guy lasted 7 weeks. They've gone back to the other guy. Look, I think we'll sit this election out. That's the danger for National. So I think they probably need to look to who can actually resonate with the voters to a greater extent and move the narrative on from this, last 2 months of internecine fighting within the party and the caucus. And one of the big issues they've got is who's a personality that can bring everyone together. And that's not going to be easy because you've now got a caucus with left and right-wing factions. That's developed in the last 3 years. That was never in the old National Party when John Key, Bill English were running it, and well before that. This is a new phenomenon, and it's not going to be easy bringing those wings together in the long term. I mean, look, one name that hasn't been mentioned, who is universally popular in the party, is Jerry Brownlee, a guy who knows the party inside out. He can take the bullets, commands universal respect, and could be just the sort of guy you need at this moment. But everyone else comes with some baggage and is going to be divisive to some extent. Any of those names that Peter and I have listed there, none of them are clean skins as such. The only one that I think could do a job overall is Brownlee, and some people would be very surprised to hear that. But look, these are such unusual times. You've got to think outside.
Well, Brownlee provides a good contrast with Ardern. I mean, Brownlee sort of could well present himself as statesmanlike and calming. He's got the experience, which some may regard as a mixed blessing, but I think on the whole we regard it positively for the Christchurch earthquake recovery. So he can manage a big project. He'd be an interesting choice. I suppose the question would be, people might say, how much gas is in the tank, though?
Also, Peter, Judith Collins, I mean, from what Jonathan has just laid out, left and right factions, does that rule out Nikki Kay? Simon Bridges, he can't make a comeback because he's tainted. So doesn't that leave the middle ground open for Judith Collins?
Well, looking from the outside, you could argue that it would certainly give her best chance in the previous attempts that she's made. The difficulty I see is that Judith might well win the short-term battle, but she probably wouldn't win the war. And the challenge for National is making sure it's got a stable platform moving forward. And it's going to take a Herculean effort by whoever takes on that top job, firstly to calm the ranks, secondly to persuade the membership that it's worth getting out there and supporting, and thirdly to take the electorate with them. And they've only got a few short weeks to do all of those things.
You've been a leader of a party.
Exactly a person to do that. I mean, she could be. You know, you've got to galvanise your base. You've got to have someone who can handle the curveballs and the tough questions, and she could be that person. I mean, look, Nikki's the deputy. Maybe she'll get there, but the problem, I think, for Nikki is, while she's a very valuable asset for National, she only represents, in terms of the ideology, one part of the electorate. And National isn't actually an urban Liberal party. That's a very important constituency, but you need someone in the longer term who can bring people together. And also, she's been part of this Todd Muller coup, so she will have enemies there, unfortunately.
So, Jonathan, I mean, Todd Muller's resignation press release, if you like, who said he's mused on things and he's not the best person to be the leader of the opposition, and it's now untenable from a health point of view for him to be there, and that he won't be saying anything else. Really? Won't be saying anything else? Donors would have put money in. The billboards have already gone up. Are voters and other people owed more of an explanation?
Well, look, I think in time, yes, but I mean, I think everyone's very concerned for his welfare at this point, because no one really knows exactly what's going on, but it seems he's suffered some sort of crisis of confidence, and I think people want to give him some space to deal with that. But look, in time, unless he gets out and owns the narrative around this, and people would be perfectly accepting of that, the narrative will end up being written for him. So I don't think it'll be, this week, this month, but you can already see in what's being written. People are assuming he's alluded to a health problem. It seems to be something, a psychological nature, a crisis of confidence. So in time, I think for his own good, he would want to explain that. But at the moment, I think everyone's just sort of concerned for his welfare. People realise this is a very tough game, and to give him and his family some sort of space. But no one knows exactly what's going on.
I think it was telling that the Prime Minister and Winston Peters and other non-government figures have all been very respectful of Todd Muller today. I think they appreciate the difficult situation he's in. And I think there's a quiet admiration for the fact that in many senses he's shown a lot of courage in fronting this the way he has and saying, I'm not up to the job for various reasons. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I'm moving on. I mean, that's a very unusual, but I suspect welcome step in New Zealand politics, and he may have set a trend others may care to contemplate following in years to come.
Jonathan, you talked about...
I think it's a concern.
Yeah, Jonathan, you talked about the fact that there are still divisions, potentially still divisions within the National Party. So what's been the deal with the last couple of weeks with these leaks and then sort of confessions from Hamish Walker and then counter-confession from Mr Woodhouse? Is there a problem with loyalty, discipline, Or is there a dirty politics problem here? And does this need a complete clean out? Because you've got a lot of old players in there. Matthew Hooton, Michelle Bogue has obviously exited stage right recently. But is there a need for a clean out, if not just for perception?
Well, look, I don't think there's a dirty politics problem, but I do think over time National needs to get some great young new talent in. I mean, there's no question about that. When you have a leadership coup, there's always people who are bruised. There's always people who aren't necessarily going to be loyal to the new leader, and there's always trouble that's made. That happens in any party. And, Todd, because of the way the leadership was taken, hasn't been able to, in the short space of time he's had, bring all these people in behind him. It was always going to be difficult. So I don't think it had been thought through when this move was made that actually you are going to get the insurgents internally, you're going to get the leakers, and that unfortunately is an aspect of politics, per se. But look, I don't think there's a dirty politics problem, but having said that, politics does attract people who like to play internal games, and it happens in every party, rather than focusing on what are we here for. We are here to actually make a contribution to the country. Some people are attracted to the machinations just for the sake of it, but there's no systemic dirty politics problem. Having said that, I think new people broadening the talent pool would be a very healthy thing.
Peter, last word to you. Do you think there is a dirty politics problem here?
No, I think there's a perception, though, that has to be countered. I think it goes back many years, back to the was it 2014 or even earlier election. But I do think it has to be countered, and I think, unfortunately, the way in which the events last week unfolded, where it seemed to me that Muller was blindsided by a lot of things happening, made it appear as though he was actually covering up for dirty politics. I think that was incorrect, but I can understand how the perception arose. Therefore, I think a leader for the future who can step well clear of all of that and show themselves to be representing a new type of National Party, and I think National's been picking some really good candidates this election to support that, offers them their best hope. But frankly, they're sort of starting well from the back of the grid at the moment.
Great to talk to you both. Thank you for joining us. Those are former ministers, both of them. Jonathan Coleman for the National Party and United Future leader and Minister Peter Dunn. It is about 8 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you make of all of that. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The government's given out another $40 million in support for small and medium enterprises from the COVID Response and Recovery Fund. The money will go towards the Regional Business Partners Network, which says it's seen a phenomenal increase in demand for its advice and support services. The organisation says in Hawke's Bay alone, it has helped 600 businesses in the past 3 months, 3 times as many as it would normally see in an entire year. Tom Kitchen reports.
Paul and Sharon Freeman operate Stim Craftsmanship out of their garage in Napier. They turn old wine barrels into furniture and works of art. But just after 18 months in business, COVID-19 turned their fortunes upside down. Paul Freeman says demand dried up within a day.
COVID was a major for us. So we went from what we thought was success to a month where we sold virtually nothing. And we're like, oh my God, we're going to lose our house.
The Freemans needed advice and they turned to the Regional Business Partner Network. It helps firms with advice on all aspects of their business. The network's Hawke's Bay Business Growth Advisor, Leonie Woolwork, says there's been a phenomenal increase in demand for the service since COVID.
In Hawke's Bay here alone, we've had over 600 businesses access the help. In a year, we would normally deal with 200 businesses in 12 months. So in 3 to 4 months, 600 businesses. Of those 600 businesses, 400 plus are new to our team. So they're new businesses that we've had to get to know and build a relationship with.
Mrs. Woolwork says getting a good plan in place has been crucial for businesses.
Cash flow was a big point of pain at the outset. Then there was sort of moving through how to deal with their people and restructuring, so HR issues.
She says in the past 6 weeks there's been a focus on getting companies online so they can sell their products over the internet. Small Business Minister Stuart Nash and Economic Development Minister Phil Twyford joined the Freemans in their garage to announce the extra $40 million in funding this morning. The money is on top of $15 million already allocated to the Regional Business Partners scheme through the COVID Response and Recovery Fund. Mr Nash says it was always going to be tough for businesses to get through.
One thing we know about COVID, no matter how good a business person you were, you just can't plan for that level of uncertainty. And as a government, we know that. And there, the two ways we could have done things. We could have shut up shop and gone down the austerity route, or we could have said, hey, we've got the biggest chequebook in the country. We need to ensure that our businesses survive.
The government says any business with up to 100 staff can get support from the Regional Partners Network to the value of up to $5,000. More than 6,200 businesses have benefited from the scheme so far, and a further 4,600 have registered to take part. I te matau a Māui mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Tom Kitchen tēnei.
Victoria has recorded a staggering 270 new COVID-19 cases in the last 24 hours. It's the 9th day in a row the state has recorded a triple-digit increase. And now concern is growing in New South Wales about the increasing number of cases from an outbreak at a Sydney pub. Our World Watch reporter Annabelle Reid has more.
Another 270 cases of the coronavirus in the Australian state wrestling for control over its COVID-19 outbreak.
This is a wicked enemy. It is so wildly infectious. It moves so fast. It's cunning in some respects where people can be infectious for quite some time and not know it.
28 of the new cases are connected to known outbreaks, but a whopping 242 remain under investigation. The Premier, Daniel Andrews, says state authorities are having trouble tracing the huge number of cases coming through every day. Staff from the private sector, Medibank, Telstra, Qantas and Jetstar have been called in to be contact tracers. Victoria's Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, says what's concerning him is the number of COVID-infected patients who need hospital care.
There's often 10 to 20% of all coronavirus infections who require hospitalisation, so that's a couple of hundred individuals at least who'll require hospitalisation in the next couple of weeks.
Meanwhile, the fresh outbreak in cases in New South Wales has prompted the government there to bring back tougher restrictions on pubs. Group bookings will be reduced from 20 people to 10, and there'll be a cap of 300 patrons allowed in any venue.
I'd rather be doing this in a period or a situation of control. To some extent, we're still in control, rather than lose control and have to go down another path which we don't want to go down. I'd rather take those decisions now than wait in a couple of weeks when it could be too late.
The number of cases linked to a Sydney pub, the Crossroads Hotel, has risen to 28. True to its name, it's a popular pit stop for interstate traffic, and the outbreak has sparked this reaction across the border.
And in breaking news, we've just heard that South Australia has closed its borders again to all residents of New South Wales and the ACT.
South Australia's Premier, Stephen Marshall, rolling back plans to open back up to the neighbours.
The super spreader event, which has occurred at the Crossroads Hotel on the Hume Highway, is really of great concern. There are now many hundreds, in fact probably in excess of 1,000 people that are now in isolation as part of that super spreader event. We really need to see those results before we lift the borders with New South Wales and the ACT.
South Australia is not the only state wary of COVID creeping back in across the border. Queensland is set to introduce jail terms of up to 6 months for breaches of public health orders. The Health Minister, Stephen Miles, says a tough stance is needed for those who lie on their border declaration forms.
In some cases, that fine appears to not be a sufficient penalty. Perhaps people from other states think they might get away without having to pay for it. Perhaps people think that $4,000 is worth it to come to Queensland, worth the risk.
A risk he hopes people won't take if they're faced with time behind bars. For Checkpoint, Annabelle Reid.
Time for some of your feedback before the news at 6. Suzette has got in touch to say, "Hi Lisa, after a cup of tea and a lie down, I thought Amy Adams and Nikki Kay, not another bloke though, had enough of them." I feel, you do your best thinking, Suzette, after you've had a bit of a cup of tea and a lie down. Jack says, "Todd Muller was not a strong leader and fell at the first hurdle. The ordinary person in the street could see this. Nice man though. National will select a familiar face. Judith Collins with Paul Goldsmith as as deputy. He has the finance capability, Jack reckons. Someone else has suggested Paul Goldsmith has no baggage and fits the bill for economic recovery. On the other hand, Marcus got in touch to say swing voters will desert National in droves if the polarising Judith Collins becomes leader. I favour Nikki Kaye or Mark Mitchell. Another listener says why any Nat MP would want to lead that brand of toxic Tories is beyond me. Karen's got in touch as well and says, I think the National Party needs to do some work on their plan to get the country's economy out of the hole we are in and articulate it to have any credibility. I don't think it matters who the leader is as long as he or she has a plan to talk about, not dirty negative tricks. Amy Adams is their best choice, someone else says, and sanest choice. She is by far the most talented and capable. Of course they won't choose her. Sarah says, how about Amy Adams as well? So the ultimate leader is not tainted with a landslide loss. Amy was planning to retire anyway. Good point. So if you need to get rid of them after the election, is that what you're saying, Sarah? And this person says the best leader for the National Party will be someone who can stop the party looking backwards.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leata tēnei. Paula Bennett has refused to say whether she will put her hat in the ring for the National Party leadership. MPs are gathering at Parliament for a crisis meeting following the sudden resignation of Todd Muller this morning. The former deputy leader repeatedly dodged questions from reporters when she arrived at Wellington Airport. Mrs Bennett wouldn't answer whether she would take a run at the leadership or deputy leadership now.
Oh, look, I'm really not going to make any comment. It's just, these are just difficult times for the party and for the caucus, and so we're just going to work our way through that respectfully.
How did you feel when you heard the news,
I've really got no comment to make.
Will you rule out making a run?
I've just got no comment to make. I just think these things are best left for our caucus and for our party.
Another MP expected to be in the running also won't say what she'll do. Judith Collins says she will not speak about the leadership until after tonight's meeting.
I'm going to keep all of my discussions with the caucus.
Do you want to be leader?
I'm going to keep all my discussions with the caucus.
How many MPs are backing you?
I'm going to keep all my discussions with the caucus.
They have plenty locals are backing Todd Muller's decision to quit. Beverly, who lives in Katikati, says it's for the best that he made that call now.
Well, I think it actually took a lot of courage for him to actually realise that he wasn't up to the job, and he's better to stand down earlier than later.
Beverly from Katikati. Firearms owners are welcoming a decision by the Independent Police Conduct Authority over unlawful searches carried out after the Christchurch mosque attacks. During the searches, the police used powers under the Surveillance Act to enter homes without a warrant and seize firearms. The authority says 3 searches were found to be unlawful. The Council of Licensed Firearms Owners Chair, Michael Dowling, says police need to act within the law. The Ministry for Primary Industry says the Chatham Islands fishermen who failed to disclose 11 tonnes of shellfish showed an enormous level of greed and disregard for the rules. Kevin Clark was given 9 months in home detention and 200 hours of community service. Harry Locke reports.
The unreported catch was made up of roughly 1,000 kilos of power, 3,000 kilos of crayfish, and the rest was a mixture of the two. It's estimated Clark made $340,000 from the catch. MPI's Director of Compliance, Gary Orr, says the theft is unprecedented and threatens the fishery's sustainability. The Chatham Island Rock Lobster Industry Association said they felt betrayed by Clark's actions. The court also ordered the forfeiture of his boats, holding pots and quota shares, with a total value of nearly $120,000. Ko Harry Locke, TNA.
A new survey suggests low interest rates won't be enough to offset the economic impacts of COVID-19. The Reserve Bank has asked banks how lending practices have changed post-lockdown. It's found demand for residential mortgage loans has dropped significantly since March. Banks have also tightened up on lending, which has seen a drop in the number of mortgages. They expect demand and credit availability for home loans to remain in negative territory for the rest of the year. Sweeping restrictions have been reintroduced in California as the US state battles to contain a resurgence of the coronavirus. It's seen a 20% rise in infections in the last 2 weeks, having lifted a statewide lockdown in May. The BBC's Peter Bowes has more.
Well, I think initially there's going to be a lot of disappointment that after all of the work over the last few weeks and months in terms of Californians depriving themselves of being able to go to the gym or to a restaurant or to a bar. But this is a state that started early. The close down started initially in the Bay Area, the San Francisco area of California, and very quickly other parts of the state followed suit. And there was a sense for quite a long time that California was going to miss the most intense impact of this virus, the kind of impact that we saw in New York.
Peter Bowes reporting. It's 4 minutes past 6. A Pacific Island Super Rugby team based in New Zealand is gaining traction, with owners in talks with New Zealand Rugby about joining a new-look Super Rugby competition. Kanaloa Hawaii, whose backers include 5 former All Blacks, have received provisional approval to play in North America's Major League Rugby competition from next year. The group's chief executive, Tracy Artinga, says that they'd create a Super Rugby team separate to the one that'll play in the US, and it will be based in South Auckland. Former All Blacks and Wallabies skills coach Mike Byrne has been appointed as the inaugural head coach, with Tamati Ellison, his assistant. Artinga says the plan is for Ellison to be groomed as Byrne's eventual successor.
We want to make sure that this is long-term sustainable, and we needed someone who had a credible history in the international sector at that level, who could mentor and was willing to mentor a up-and-coming coach. And Tamati Ellison is that coach.
Tracy Artinga. New Zealand Rugby is currently examining the future makeup of Super Rugby and the International Rugby Championship, with its Aratipu report due to go to the board next week. Dean Pay has resigned as coach of the Canterbury Bulldogs National Rugby League side, ending an unsuccessful 3-year stint at the club. Pay led the Bulldogs to just 19 wins in 57 matches in his time at the club. Football's A-League will restart on Friday when Sydney FC play the Wellington Phoenix in Sydney. Melbourne Victory and Western United were originally scheduled to play on Thursday, but the game has been postponed. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Damien Fenton, our military historian, joins us once again. He's taking a look at some of the key events in the Pacific War in July 1945. Tony Stamp and the Song Crush team are back with the latest new music, and we'll bring you any developments at the National Party caucus meeting this evening. That's Nights with me, Karen Hay, in for Brian Crump, all this week from 7 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, cloudy periods tonight, rain developing tomorrow morning and becoming heavy from the afternoon with possible downpours and easterly gales. Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, patchy drizzle, turning to rain tomorrow with heavy falls about Coromandel from the evening. Strong or gale easterlies tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty, Central High Country, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mostly cloudy, occasional rain or drizzle. Whanganui, Manawatu, Horowhenua and Kapiti, mainly fine. Wellington, Wairarapa and Marlborough, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow morning and a few showers developing. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine weather. Canterbury and Otago, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow. A few showers or drizzle developing, especially near the coast. Southland, a few light showers clearing tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. RNZ National. It's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Boy, what a day in politics. National MPs are gathering in Wellington for a crisis meeting to elect a new leader, just 53 days after they chose the last one. It follows the shock resignation of Todd Muller, who rolled Simon Bridges in May. In a statement, the Bay of Plenty MP said after reflecting on his experiences of the last several weeks, it has become clear to him that he is not the best person to lead the opposition at this critical time. Todd Muller went on to say things had become untenable from a health point of view. So right now, the job that some describe as the toughest in politics is vacant, following a baptism by fire that ended with a political burnout.
We have breaking news.
Todd Muller has resigned as leader of the opposition. In the statement, he says, "I have taken time over the weekend to reflect on my experience over the last several weeks as leader of the opposition."
Stunned, Muller out, just like that.
To be the leader of the opposition and leader of the New Zealand National Party at this critical time for New Zealand. It is more important than ever.
53 days ago, Todd Muller prized the leadership from Simon Bridges' clenched fist by a whisker, after 2 political polls showed the party vote was headed in the wrong direction if the goal was winning. Holding his wife's hand, Todd Muller confidently marched to the podium to give his first speech as leader. Nikki Kaye and Judith Collins at his back. A select group of MPs fanned out around him.
Now we must begin taking another step forward together with confidence. The confidence to rebuild our country, to rebuild our economy, and to restore the livelihoods of New Zealanders. Only a national government can provide the leadership to do that. That is why we must win the next election. Nikki and I and our team understand that the task for the next government is immense. We are honoured by the opportunity to lead this great party, and we take it very seriously.
Barely crowned leader, and it was another bit of headgear that stirred up controversy. The Make America Great Again baseball cap displayed in his new office was arguably more own goal than home run, and was swiftly packed away.
I got one of those, and I got a Hillary Clinton badge, and I've got them both in my office. But for some reason, the Hillary Clinton badge never gets looked at, and everyone sees the MAGA cap. When I was a 10-year-old boy, I wanted to be the American president. I've adjusted that slightly. I've got a different goal now in 122 days.
A relative unknown to voters, there was the whirlwind getting to know you phase of a new relationship.
If you've got room for one dinner guest, Scott Morrison or Donald Trump?
Oh, Scott Morrison.
Legalise cannabis or not?
No.
What's your superpower?
Oh, I'm a pretty good cuddler of the kids.
And what's your nickname?
Nickname? Toddles. Toddy. Toddster.
Meanwhile, Todd Muller was matchmaking too. Politicians with portfolios. Judith Collins took out Economic and Regional Development and Shadow Attorney General. Amy Adams was resurrected from the political dead. Muller wooing her back from planned retirement. But with Bridges down and Paula Bennett jettisoned to unlucky 13 in the rankings, Todd Muller's front bench was a whiteout. Asked about Māori representation in his caucus, and Vice Captain Nikki Kaye set up a second own goal.
Shane Retty and Paula Bennett.
And obviously Paul Goldsmith obviously is of Ngāti Porou.
Do you identify as Māori? You've just been named as the one Māori.
No, I'm not Māori. Why did Nikki Kaye say that?
She obviously wasn't 100% clear on his whakapapa.
The next day, Todd Muller returned to familiar territory, kati.
Well, I'm delighted that the media followed me. You're never quite sure who turns up with these things, but it's fair to say that Apata hasn't quite seen a circus like this for a while.
That delight would fade in T-minus 47 days. But in this moment, visiting a local pack house dressed in high-vis, Muller was happy to be seen and heard.
Most New Zealanders are unemployed, but they don't know it yet. We have an extraordinary crisis in front of us, and our caucus is totally focused on developing an economic recovery plan that works for New Zealand families.
Let's briefly revisit his first speech as leader.
I'm not interested in opposition for opposition's sake. We're all tired of that kind of politics. I'm about ideas that get results.
The fledgling leader honed in on allegations of government failings at the border, isolation breaches and runners. One word revealed itself as a firm favourite.
It's a shambles, actually. Being managed in a shambolic way. This shambolic nonsense can be sent back home.
Todd Muller would shortly be facing his own shambles. In the meantime, a visit to his hometown of Te Puna did little to cement his identity as National's new leader.
I joined the Labour Party rather than I joined the National Party. Should I start again?
Then the Muller load hit. Tuesday last week, National MP Hamish Walker outed himself as the person responsible for the COVID-19 patient leaks. Former National Party President Michelle Bogue trumped his confession with her own. She was the original source of the information.
Now, in breaking news, we have another statement. This one is from Michelle Bogue, the former president.
But it didn't end there. Remember that leadership speech.
My absolute focus as the National Party leader will be New Zealand's economic recovery.
What policies have you sorted? You don't have to tell me what they are, but which ones are in the can?
I'm not going to go through that with you on afternoon radio.
You can't even tell us what policies you've decided on. Forget the content of the policy, just the ones that you're in agreement on and they're ready to go.
No, I'm not going there because it's.
Is that because you don't have them?
No, not at all, Lisa.
The day after the cascade of confessions, Todd Muller in Ashburton for a significant policy announcement was facing bumper-to-bumper questions, but not the ones he wanted.
Any questions about the road? Come on, 1.5 billion, 4-lane highway, fantastic. Sorry?
This is an isolated incident. Hamish Walker went behind my back.
On Friday, it was clear Todd Muller had fudged it. Senior National MP Michael Woodhouse had also got leaked private patient information from Michelle Bogue and deleted it around the time the government announced a full investigation.
Did anyone in your team know about the source of this leak prior to that?
No.
Did any of your MPs, other than Hamish Walker, know about the source of the leak prior to that?
Not that I'm aware of at all.
Have you sought assurances?
I haven't asked every other MP.
At the point he was asked, Todd Muller knew it all, but chose not to volunteer the information, prompting allegations of a resurgence of so-called dirty politics. MPs in his inner circle say the new leader went silent over the weekend. By today, Todd Muller's initial enthusiastic ambitions were distant musings.
So let's talk about KPIs here. What's the deadline for getting back to polling over 40%? What's your goal?
My total focus is to win the election. We're 120 days out from the election. That's my team's focus. That's what we'll do.
For Muller's leadership, the countdown election clock is frozen at 67 days.
But just who is the right person to take up the national leadership? Mark Mitchell and Judith Collins have been on the informal shortlist. Our cameraman Nick Munro and reporter Nita Blake-Person headed out to see what their voters thought of a local leader and potential Prime Minister.
National's strong team of Todd Muller and Nikki Kaye gone by breakfast. The party's hoardings yet to catch up with the rapid pace of National's changing face. So who now for the top spot? Rodney MP Mark Mitchell has had leadership aspirations in the past, so we visited his office to see whether he was mulling over another crack.
We are obviously looking for Mark Mitchell. Yeah. Is he busy organising becoming the next leader of the National Party?
I can't comment on that. He's on his way down to Wellington later today, and the National Party will go through its process.
Do you think he'd be the right person for the job?
I can't comment on that.
News of Todd Muller's resignation was just trickling out this morning, but some in Mark Mitchell's electorate were already backing him to step up.
It was a bit of a shock this morning, but yeah, good. We need one. Is Mark Mitchell the man? Why not? He's local, yes. Who do you think would be the best person to lead the National Party?
Mark Mitchell, I think. Yeah.
We're in Mark Mitchell territory. What do you think about him as stepping into that role?
Oh, yeah, could do, but Judith Collins would be the one.
You're backing Judith?
Yep.
I don't really think that he's a good fit at the moment.
I think Judith Collins probably be the one to be the caretaker for the time being, till they get their act together.
The people's choice today was clear.
Pasha Collins.
Yeah. You think that Judith Collins would be a good fit?
Yeah.
And why do you think that?
I think that she's got lots more experience than anyone else, and she can hold her own with anybody talking.
I think she's very strong, but she's also very polarising, and whether that's going to work at this point in time, I do not know.
And who do you think would be a good leader?
I don't think they're doing too well at the moment, just like with everything going on and like the leaks with the COVID-19 people. And I don't really keep up too much, so I wouldn't really know. is Paula Bennett still around? Or I don't know, I liked her. And she seemed like she was going to get things done, but otherwise I haven't really been following it too much. It's a bit of a shit show at the moment.
So we headed across town to Judith Collins' Papakura electorate office. She wasn't there either, but her supporters were.
She's been in there long enough. She's done a lot of good things for the community, hasn't she?
Possible successor could either be Nikki Kay or Judith Collins, definitely, because those are the people with experience and they know what the politics and the country is like and what's stated well before the Labour Party took over. And I think Judith is the right person for the job.
Probably Judith Collins, yes. She's a local here with us, and I think that, yeah, she would definitely be the right one. Yeah.
Do you think she can win this election?
She has got the best chance.
I don't know. I guess I know. I don't really know too many of the politicians, and I know she's definitely one that I do know of because she was the MP in Papakura, and I've lived in Papakura most of my life. And yeah, I think she's just a bit of a no-nonsense type of lady, which is what we like.
Good luck. Yeah.
Do you think they'll need it?
They're gonna need it. Yeah. Go Jacinda.
Media did eventually track down Judith Collins at Auckland Airport, where she wasn't ruling out a leadership bid.
Are you the woman to take on Jacinda Ardern?
Well, I'm certainly a member of the wonderful National Party team, and I'm happy to be so.
Is this Judith Collins' moment? You've just written a book, the election's right around the corner. Is this Judith Collins' moment?
It's my moment to focus on my caucus and the team that I'm part of, which is the National Party team, and that's what I'm doing at the moment.
As for Mark Mitchell, he hasn't responded to requests about his leadership plans, but recently departed leader Simon Bridges hasn't ruled out giving it another go. In the meantime, Deputy Leader Nikki Kay is filling the spot. She too hasn't said whether she wants the top job. For Checkpoint, Cornisha Blakeperson, TNA.
All right, our political editor Jane Patterson joins us now live from the steps of Parliament. Jane, what are we expecting to happen tonight? Will we get a decision?
That's not quite clear yet, Lisa, although we've just spoken to one MP, Chris Penk, who's just arrived in for the 7 o'clock start for this caucus meeting. He said that really it would be preferable to get it done and over with sooner rather than later. And I imagine that would be really the thought of many of these MPs. They've already been through one pretty brutal leadership campaign pretty recently, and I doubt that they'll want this to drag on, because the longer it drags on, the longer we're out here asking them about the leadership, and it just becomes very messy. Although they have said, the whip said today, Barbara Kuriger, it could be 24 hours to 48 hours that they make a decision. So two potential scenarios: that they come out and have elected a new leader and potentially a new deputy, or they come out and announce the array of contenders and a timeline for a potential vote.
OK, so they want this to be as bloodless as possible, given what's gone on recently. Let's check out some of the contenders. Simon Bridges, is he really in the hunt for a comeback here?
Look, I don't know how serious Mr Bridges is about all of this. He talked to media on the way back in, and he wouldn't rule it out. And he just said, look, there are some difficult decisions for the caucus to have. I mean, he would be an obvious one as one of the few people in the caucus probably at the moment that actually wants this job. But of course, he was rolled by his caucus. There's still a lot of distrust there, and people who didn't support him. So again, I'm not sure how serious a contender he is. Now, Nikki Kay as deputy was appointed acting leader today. Throughout this, I don't know how strong her leadership ambitions are. She's always talked about being much more comfortable in that deputy leader role. We could see her step forward and take the leadership through to the election if someone else doesn't step forward, if there's no other clear contender. And then, of course, we have Judith Collins, and I must say that today consensus has really been firming up around her. We've talked to some MPs who just see her as the only option at this stage. And so, yeah, MPs arriving, they'll be here. A lot of them are here already. We've been at the airport. They've been streaming into the capital. At 7 o'clock or around 7:30, they'll be up in the caucus room on the third floor here up at Parliament. And we really don't quite know what the process is going to be. It could be people just getting up and declaring their candidacy and pitching their case and making their case. This is quite unusual. We don't have the time for the normal lobbying over the phones, the frantic phone calls, the days of lobbying and horse trading. It it may be that the people who want to put their hat in the race just get up and make their case, and there's a vote tonight.
The other kind of interesting factors there unanswered. Paula Bennett, is she still retiring?
I think that would very much depend on the outcome of this leadership race. She had made it clear that her political aspirations under the leadership of Todd Muller were no longer there, because she didn't have the pathway potentially to become Deputy Prime Minister again if she wasn't Deputy Leader. If there was an opportunity, and as I said, it's probably an outside chance if Simon Bridges stood and won the leadership again, that, very possibly she could come back as leader, as Deputy Leader and Campaign Chair. So I think her position will very much be dependent on who wins that leadership. I think if it is Judith Collins, I think Paula Bennett will still intend to depart politics come September.
Do we know anything more at this point about why Todd Muller chose to resign? Obviously we've had his statement, but is this a case of be careful what you wish for?
Look, what we've been told today, Lisa, and it's been a very sensitive situation, is that he has had some form of breakdown, and that's what we've been reporting today. So, mental health is a very difficult thing to talk about. It hasn't been openly said today, but that's, what we understand. His personal health is at risk, and so that we haven't heard anything to the contrary in terms of why that is not the reason that he's resigned. And it really all seemed to culminate around that disastrous series of interviews last week. Over the weekend, we've been told by senior MPs and people who'd normally be connected that the communications had really come to quite a close circle. That Todd Muller was really MIA through, for example, wasn't at a regional conference. Had basically said that he was sick earlier this week. So he hadn't been out in the public. He hadn't been in communication with his MPs, and obviously has been thinking all of this over as it's been coming out. So look, that's what we understand, and we, as I said, we have no reason to think that there are other reasons behind his resignation. It just became too tough.
Just in terms of practicalities, all of these billboards went up in the last, week, 10 days with Nikki Kay and Todd Muller on them. We saw video footage of one being taken down. What is happening, do we know?
So, excuse me, we're just seeing cars and taxis pulling up. We're just having a look at exactly who it might be. And our cameraman Logan is saying that it might actually be Amy Adams. So she may be pulling right up, but I'm not sure. But
if she wanders past you,
one MP that I spoke to, they were...
Sorry, if she wanders past, give her a yell.
It seems like she's driving away, so maybe not. Oh, she is down there, but I cannot see her. So unfortunately, but we do have reporters out there, Lisa, so they may be able to bring us some comments. But practically, I talked to one MP this morning, and they were completely gobsmacked and blindsided by this news that all MPs received on a caucus call this morning. And they basically had to ring their electorate staff or ring their party people and say, don't put the billboards up, stop the billboards from coming out of the warehouse, because they had Todd Muller all over them. So this is the point we're at, as actually we were, of course, in 2017 when Jacinda Ardern took over the leadership at a very late stage. But she actually was even closer to the election than Todd Muller. She took over 53 days before the election, and he has taken over 67 days.
Thanks, Jane. Jane Patterson, coiled spring on the steps of Parliament there, who will no doubt bring all the developments to us throughout the evening. Finally tonight, disinfecting robots are on the rise around the world as the battle against the coronavirus pandemic continues. According to the WHO, traditional cleaning methods like a mere mortal with a mop are only 60% effective. Rosanna Pilpot reports.
This may become a common sight at work, at the shops or public transport. Disinfecting robots. According to the World Health Organization, traditional cleaning methods using humans and cleaning solutions are only 60% effective. Across the world, new robot designs are quickly emerging in an attempt to make spaces safe again. This remote-controlled robot is equipped with a disinfecting vapor cannon. It can sanitize large areas inside and out and may help Britain get back to work after lockdown, according to its developers.
It can be used in a variant of applications, from
inside of buildings such as this, external shopping centres, churches. It can be operated from 100 metres away. It could go inside of a building and disinfect the inside of different rooms inside of a building while the operator sits in a car outside.
Another method is using UV light to sanitise objects and spaces, like this robot that's being deployed in malls in Singapore. Instead of spraying chemicals, the sunburst UV disinfecting mobile robot relies on its ultraviolet C lamps to sterilise surfaces, hard-to-reach crevices, and even the air. UV disinfecting robots are being put on the front lines elsewhere across the world as well, like this one in a Boston food warehouse, or in Buenos Aires. Argentinian firm UV Robotics says while a human can't cover every millimetre of a space that needs sterilisation, the UV robot can, and has a disinfection rate of more than 99%. Over in Asia, Hong Kong International Airport is deploying 12 cleaning robots, which emit ultraviolet rays, spray disinfectant, and clean floors. The technology was first used on chartered flights that brought residents back to Hong Kong for lockdown.
So this is, we have been doing this in the last 1 or 2 months and prepare for the resumption of the passenger and flight, where we hope they will all come back in June.
And underground, Hong Kong's subway is deploying an autonomous fleet of mini fridge-sized robots, spraying a vaporized hydrogen peroxide solution to disinfect trains and stations.
The first thing we do is use 1 to 49-bit solutions to clean the environment. But there is still a tiny gap or tiny area that is not easy to reach. Therefore, we keep on deep cleaning day in and day out. With this hydrogen peroxide robot, we are able to have 100% sure by spraying the hydrogen peroxide mist that we normally in the past they use in the hospital, in the lab, to have a deep disinfection.
That was very interesting, and that's all we've got time for this evening. But before we go, one last quick bit of feedback from someone who's mounting a campaign. BBB, bring back Bulger, they say. Our news teams will keep you up to date through the evening, and we'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. An emergency caucus to pick a new national leader will begin in 30 minutes. Todd Muller's constituents say his sudden resignation has left them in shock. Outgoing National MP Sarah Dowie says the party's leadership coup in May was a mistake and Simon Bridges should have remained as leader. Firearms owners are welcoming a decision that 3 home searches carried out after the Christchurch mosque attacks were unlawful, and the fisherman missing from the shores of Lake Wakatipu in Glenorchy has been named as Dunedin man Martin Sutty. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
RNZ's Black Sheep podcast presents the story of New Zealand's most embarrassing jailbreak.
If you think about sort of Pirates of the Caribbean and things like that, you know, it's on that scale of just sort of absurd, weird adventure. But it's all real. It's true.